Joe, the state of Georgia, the Peach State's biggest rivalry here, Georgia versus Georgia Tech. Your thoughts on how this one's going to play out?
A lot of people are calling for wishful thinking in this game that Georgia Tech's going to pull out the upset on the road against Georgia. I don't think that's going to happen. I wouldn't be shocked if Georgia Tech doesn't cover the 19.5-point spread on BetOnline. But we need to remember here what Georgia's playing for. We need to remember that Georgia has stumbled a little bit throughout this season, and they have not been able to get to that ultimate goal of finishing the year undefeated because they've been given such a brutal schedule. Georgia Tech runs the ball well. They have been a nuisance for a lot of opponents that they've faced. They have caused headaches, and we saw what they were able to do against Miami. And also, there's a lot of people bringing up the rushing production that UMass was able to get off of Georgia last week, which
okay,
I know, but that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not really buying into that crap. I think that that's a G5 matchup, and Georgia completely overlooked them, and there was no reason to believe that there was ever going to be a situation where UMass was going to upset Georgia. I say all this to say that Georgia has an SEC championship on the line. They need to win this game.
Well, if they lose the game, they're still going.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, they've clinched.
Oh, because they beat Tennessee.
Yeah.
The college football playoff is still on the line. Because if you lose this game, you lose the SEC championship game.
If they lose and then they win the SEC, they have an auto bid.
Well, if they theoretically lost in the college in the SEC championship game, there would be a lot of cloudiness on if they end up getting into the college football playoff.
I'm just trying to mess with you.
All I'm trying to say here is that Georgia needs to finish the season strong. They need to finish with momentum going into the matchup that they're going to have in Atlanta. I don't see a reason to believe, outside of some scrappiness that Georgia Tech has put out there on film, that they're going to be able to pull out this upset.
So here's the thing. I have a team in Georgia that has problems and issues running the ball versus a team in the ACC that's been able to stop the run moderately well. Here's what I know about Georgia Tech. Look, man, they don't have the talent level of Georgia, but they do play fundamentally sound. They've gotten a lot better under Brent Key. They tackle well in space. They give 110% effort. They're going to be where they need to be. They just don't have guys that at the level that Georgia does. But everything else being said, I made this analogy last night. I'm going to use it on you again. I feel like this is a public school in Georgia versus a prep school in Georgia Tech. Right? One team that plays fundamentally sound to get where they need to be versus a team that's just got a bunch of dudes on it. Now, I'm not saying that Kirby doesn't want to play fundamentally sound. You get what I'm trying to say here. Here's my thing. I know that Georgia Tech has upset Miami. I know how they did. I think Miami defensively is fraudulent, and I don't think Georgia is. I do think that this game's close because it's always close early. But I think as it wears on and depth starts playing a factor here, and that secondary starts getting a little bit winded, Georgia's going to open up this football game. What they've done with their tight ends the last couple of weeks is getting back to Georgia football. Carson Beck is playing cleaner. And, Joe, I be real with you, Georgia Tech's secondary has not been great in coverage. They haven't been. They want to play a lot of man-to-man coverage. And I think Georgia can win in those one-on-one situations, especially when they go in 12 and what we saw at times last week in 13 personnel. I just think that this is an utmost mismatch. I think Georgia Tech is a scrappy ACC football team. They want this one. I think Georgia, with Kirby and the messaging this week, is going to be different on where they want to go as a team. I do think that you see it against UMass. I went and watched that game again today before we got on. Joe, they're playing as simple, basic shit as that they can run. I mean, it
looked like they were trying to play a scrimmage. That was what they were doing.
It looked like that they were trying to get out of there with nobody getting hurt, is what it really looked like.
Yeah.
Okay. But look, I like what Brent Key has done. They have had some investment on what they're doing as a program. They've they've flipped some guys in the state of Georgia. Their program for where they were is ascending. But there's a program that you're playing that is the pinnacle of where you're trying to go. I'm really, really interested to see how Georgia can run the ball here because I have an ACC team that's been pretty stout against the run. You have not been able to run the football. How do they respond to that? It's going to be a question for me this week.
I think the way that you've described this is pretty apt. That Georgia Tech, the way that they're built, and they're slowly getting healthier and healthier. They've been dealing with some injuries, and Philo had a decent game who's been filling in at quarterback for them, who's the young gun who had the great game against Miami. They do all the right things to be the upset dog in the ACC, which is blocking really well, playing really good contain, disrupting the quarterback, running the football, getting Justice Haynes involved and doing whatever you can to get, Jamal Haynes, and getting him rolling and getting as much production out of him in spots this season and in their biggest wins. But that talent gap, I think, is going to show up here. This game last year was close, and Haynes King was more healthy and available when they played each other last year. I see, even though Georgia has taken a slight step back in terms of record, that Georgia's athleticism and their physicality should be able to take over in this game. The stuff that has helped Georgia Tech win unexpected performances so far this year, I don't think that translates to a matchup here against Georgia that, like you're talking about, needs to run the ball better, needs to produce better. It will certainly come down to something that we keep talking about. Does Georgia Tech turn over Carson Beck? Does Carson Beck make those mistakes that have really deflated any offensive momentum that they've generated? That's like the huge thing that I keep following here with Georgia. The only way that Georgia Tech hangs around is if they produce those turnovers and if Georgia can't run the ball. Those are my two biggest things in this game.
Here's what when I look at Georgia this year and people see that they're 10-2 or 9-2, about to be 10-2. This is what I feel people don't realize. Joe, they had the hardest strength of schedule in the country this year. It's not remotely close. They sit at number 1 for a reason. They're playing yet another scrappy football team. Joe, Georgia's just simply not as bad as people think that they are because they have 2 losses. They're not. They're defensively, they're still in the top 15 in total defense. They're still good in pass defense. Their run defense, I'll give it to them last week. Okay, maybe a little bit leaky. Maybe that's where Georgia Tech can get some stuff. But, man, they're so good on third down and getting off the field. They've done a lot of really good things on third downs the last couple of weeks offensively. I love that they're getting their tight ends more involved. I think Mike Bobo has kind of gotten into a rhythm on what he knows and what he thinks his personnel can do. And I think people look at Georgia and say they're not living up to their standards, so they're down. And you're right, they are. What happens when you stop turning the ball over? They start annihilating teams. Do they have to find a way to start running the football? Yes. You can't deny that. But Joe, I look at them and say, well, it's not me saying this. Nobody has faced a tougher schedule in the country, tougher than Georgia, and I think that they've been able to prevail from that. Listen, I feel like Kirby is going to be able to get his team up for this one.
Yes.
Okay. And he is a Georgia guy. He don't like Georgia Tech. If there's somebody that can get a team motivated to beat a team that he simply does not like, it's going to be this one. And don't think I forgot about the game where George Pickens started throwing some hands against Georgia Tech. That's all I'm going to say.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number 1 source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.